Imagine this. You're 8 months pregnant, ready to welcome a new life into the world, when the last thing you expect happens. Your boss calls you into the office and fires you. You've been a loyal employee for years, putting in long hours and doing everything right, yet suddenly, all of that counts for nothing. Your heart sinks, and all the excitement you had for your baby starts to fade as panic sets in. How will you manage now? How will you provide for your family? But what if I told you that this wasn't the end of the story? In fact, it's just the beginning of something much bigger and far more shocking. This is the story of one woman, a devoted wife, and a dedicated employee, whose life takes an unexpected turn when her pregnancy and her job collide in the worst way possible. Her name is Sarah, and she's about to learn that her boss's actions are going to unleash a chain of events that no one, including the boss, could have ever predicted. Sarah had always been the kind of person who gave her all at work. She wasn't just a good employee. She was an essential part of the team, known for her hardworking attitude, her attention to detail, and her ability to juggle multiple tasks under pressure. Yet, despite all of this, when she broke the news to her boss that she was expecting, she noticed an immediate shift. There were awkward silences in meetings, subtle changes in her workload, and a growing tension that made her feel like she didn't belong. But she tried to stay optimistic, reminding herself that her job was secure, that she was entitled to maternity leave, and that nothing could shake her confidence. That was until the day she was called into the boss's office for what she thought was just another meeting. What Sarah didn't know was that her boss had already made up his mind. He told her, without hesitation, that her services were no longer needed. He said the company was going in a different direction and that her position was being eliminated. Sarah's heart dropped. She could barely process the words. Fired, pregnant, out of a job with no warning and no compassion. As she walked out of that office, the weight of the situation hit her full force. How could this happen to her? Was it really because of her pregnancy? Was she being discriminated against for starting a family? The injustice of it all felt suffocating, and she found herself questioning everything: her career, her worth, her future. But Sarah wasn't the type to back down easily. She had something that her boss didn't know, a secret weapon that would change everything. You see, Sarah's husband, James, wasn't just any husband. He was a lawyer, a skilled, no-nonsense lawyer who had helped countless people in situations far worse than hers. James was passionate about fighting for the underdog, and when he found out what had happened to Sarah, he wasn't going to let it slide. What happens next, though, is what makes this story so extraordinary. You'd think that Sarah and James might just walk away and try to find a solution, the traditional way, right? But that's not what they did. Instead, they took a bold step, one that would not only challenge their boss, but also expose a system that many people didn't even know existed. The tension between Sarah and her boss is just the tip of the iceberg. This is about more than just firing an employee. It's about standing up for what's right, about fighting against a deeply ingrained injustice that affects countless women in the workplace. With James on her side, Sarah didn't just sit back and take it. She fought back, and what she uncovered during the process would shock everyone, especially her boss. You won't believe what happened next, because it wasn't just a legal battle over a wrongful termination. It was something much bigger, something that would have far-reaching consequences for the company and everyone involved. Sarah's story turned into a public spectacle, and soon, people from all over were watching, waiting to see what would unfold. As Sarah and James prepare for what lies ahead, there's an undeniable sense of anticipation in the air. Will they win this battle? Will Sarah's firing spark a larger conversation about maternity leave and workplace rights? Or will the consequences of standing up for her rights become too much for them to handle? The tension continues to rise, leaving everyone wondering just how far Sarah and James are willing to go, and whether or not they can expose the truth in time. You might think you know how this story is going to end, but trust me, you're in for a huge surprise. This isn't just a case of a boss firing an employee. It's about so much more. Stay tuned to find out what happens when Sarah and James turn the tables, because what they're about to do will leave you speechless. You won't believe what happens next. As Sarah sat at the kitchen table, still in shock from her meeting with her boss, the reality of her situation began to sink in. The house felt too quiet now, even with her husband James, pacing back and forth, trying to process what had just happened. She could barely look at him, her mind swirling with a mix of anger, fear, and confusion. James was the calm in the storm, but even he couldn't hide his frustration. What did he say exactly? James asked again, the disbelief evident in his voice. Sarah repeated the words that had burned through her mind over and over, the ones that still stung like a slap in the face. He said my position was eliminated. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He just handed me a severance package, like it was no big deal, like I wasn't even a person anymore. Her voice cracked at the end. James ran a hand through his hair, trying to keep his emotions in check. But inside, he was already making plans. I can't believe this. You've been with that company for years, and they do this to you because you're pregnant? That's discrimination, Sarah. That's illegal. Sarah nodded, her mind clouded with uncertainty. I don't know what to do. I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to stir up trouble, but this feels wrong. I feel betrayed. I'm not letting this go, James said, his voice firm now. You've worked hard, and they don't get to treat you like this. I'm going to handle this. You're not going to be alone in this fight. James wasn't just a lawyer. He was a man who believed in justice, especially for those who didn't have the power to fight back on their own. This wasn't just about a job. It was about something bigger. It was about a system that allowed bosses to fire women because of their pregnancy. A system that had failed Sarah and so many others like her. The next day, James reached out to his contacts, doing everything he could to get a clear understanding of Sarah's legal rights. He wasn't going to let her be just another casualty in a broken system. He called in favors, digging through legal precedents and reaching out to women's rights organizations. The more he learned, the angrier he became, and the more determined he was to take down the company that had wronged his wife. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to keep things together. She reached out to her friends and family, gathering support and advice. But every time someone said, "You can't let this slide," her heart ached with the weight of what she had to lose. What would it mean for her family if she took this to court? Could they afford to fight back? Or would it drain them emotionally and financially? Her thoughts were a whirlwind, and even as she tried to focus on the future, she couldn't help but feel helpless. But James wouldn't let her back down. He was relentless, and the more he dug, the more he uncovered. It wasn't just about Sarah's firing. It was about a pattern of behavior. He started to notice similar cases at the company. Other women who had been let go or forced out of their positions after announcing their pregnancies. It wasn't just a mistake or a fluke. It was a trend, one that needed to be exposed. As the legal battle began to take shape, Sarah found herself in the uncomfortable position of becoming the face of something much larger. The more she shared her story with others, the more women came forward with their own experiences. The company had been getting away with this for years, and no one had ever stood up to them before. Now, Sarah wasn't just fighting for her own job back. She was fighting for every woman who had been silenced, overlooked, or cast aside simply for being pregnant. The pressure began to mount, and Sarah felt it every day. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying the weight of an entire movement. Her story had gone public, and soon, the media caught wind of what was happening. Headlines spread across the news. Boss fires pregnant employee, but she's not backing down. And pregnancy discrimination. One woman's legal battle against an employer who took everything from her. As the court date approached, Sarah's anxiety grew. The unknowns loomed large. Would they win? Would the public side with her? Or would she end up crushed under the weight of the corporate machine? Then came the bombshell. The company's legal team dug deep into Sarah's background, trying to find any reason they could to discredit her. They discovered something they didn't expect. Sarah had a history of impeccable performance reviews and praise from past managers, but they also found something even more troubling for them. Sarah had kept a detailed journal of her experiences at work, including the moments when she had noticed subtle signs of discrimination, the quiet moments when her boss seemed distant, and the times when she was quietly sidelined during meetings. Her journal was a roadmap of her entire experience, proof that this wasn't just one bad decision. It was a pattern of behavior. But the company wasn't about to go down without a fight. They fought dirty, pulling out all the stops. They questioned Sarah's ability to perform her job while pregnant, claiming she was a liability. They even tried to accuse her of exaggerating the situation, saying her claims of discrimination were fabricated. And then, the final blow came. James was informed that their boss, the one who had fired Sarah, had been involved in a similar case years ago, one that had been quietly settled under the radar. It was all starting to unravel, and now Sarah wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting to expose the deep-seated injustice that had gone unnoticed for far too long. With the case reaching its boiling point, both Sarah and James knew that the outcome would have consequences far beyond their own lives. Would they be able to take down the company that had wronged her? Or would they be crushed under the weight of its power? The courtroom was about to become a battlefield, and no one could predict how it would end. But one thing was certain: Sarah's fight had only just begun. The tension was unbearable. As the courtroom doors opened, Sarah sat quietly beside James, her heart racing, trying to steady her breath. Today would be the day that could change everything. The case had drawn attention from every corner of the media, and now, as they prepared to face the company's legal team head-on, Sarah could feel the weight of everyone watching. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become a symbol of every woman who had been treated unfairly, dismissed because of her pregnancy, and forced to stay silent out of fear. The opening statements were delivered with the precision and authority that came with years of experience. Sarah's lawyer painted a vivid picture of a woman who had been loyal to her company, who had excelled in every aspect of her job, and who had suddenly been thrown out simply for expecting a child. Then it was the company's turn. Their lawyers tried to downplay the firing, claiming it was a business decision, nothing personal. They tried to twist Sarah's history, poking holes in her character and accusing her of exaggerating her experience. But James wasn't having it. He had come prepared, and he wasn't going to let them turn the truth on its head. "I'm going to show you something that will change the way you see this case," James said, standing tall in front of the courtroom. He presented the journal. Sarah had kept a detailed record of the months leading up to her firing, documenting every incident, every subtle moment of discrimination. The judge flipped through the pages, eyes narrowing as he took in the evidence. It was clear. This wasn't just about one fired employee. This was about a systemic problem. A pattern that went beyond Sarah, stretching through the company like a hidden poison that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Then came the unexpected twist. James revealed that the company had tried to cover up a similar case years ago. A woman who had been fired for the same reasons as Sarah. And just like Sarah, she had fought back, but her case was quickly buried under a settlement. That settlement had been carefully kept out of the public eye, hidden behind layers of legal jargon and confidentiality clauses. But now, with this case, everything was about to come to light. The company's lawyers were stunned, realizing the ground beneath them was slipping away. Their defense was falling apart, and just when it seemed like they might try to settle quietly, James dropped the bombshell. He had secured an email from Sarah's boss to the company's HR department, explicitly stating that he was considering firing her the moment he learned of her pregnancy. The email was dated months before the official termination, proving beyond any doubt that Sarah had been targeted from the start. It was the smoking gun that tied everything together. With that, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The judge, who had been listening intently to both sides, leaned forward, his expression hardening. There was no denying what had happened now. The company had wronged Sarah in the most blatant way, and the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah's lawyer pressed forward, demanding not just an apology, but full compensation and the company's responsibility for the harm they had caused. But the moment that truly shook everyone came when Sarah was asked to speak. She stood up, her voice strong despite the nerves running through her. "This isn't just about me. It's about every woman who has been forced to choose between their job and their family. It's about the ones who couldn't speak out, the ones who didn't have a voice. I'm fighting for them. I'm fighting for my future and my child's future, and I'm not backing down." The judge nodded, his eyes softening as he took in her words. The room was silent, every eye focused on Sarah, the woman who had just become the face of a fight that had been ignored for too long. When the verdict finally came, it was everything Sarah had hoped for, and more. The company was found guilty of wrongful termination, and Sarah was awarded a substantial settlement. But more importantly, the company was ordered to revise its maternity policies to make sure that no other woman would ever have to face the same kind of discrimination Sarah had endured. It was a victory not just for Sarah, but for every employee who had ever been silenced by fear. The message was clear. Pregnancy discrimination would no longer be tolerated. As Sarah walked out of the courthouse with James by her side, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. They had done it. They had fought back, and they had won. But even more than that, she felt proud. Proud to have stood up. Proud to have been the one to make a difference. The battle wasn't just about one wrongful firing. It was about changing the way women were treated in the workplace. About creating a world where being a mother didn't mean sacrificing your career. James squeezed her hand as they stepped into the bright sunlight outside. "You did it," he said, his voice full of pride. Sarah smiled, her heart light. "We did it together." In that moment, Sarah realized that this journey had been about so much more than just fighting for her job back. It had been about standing up for herself, for every woman who had been overlooked, for every person who had felt powerless. The victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in the change they had started, the ripple effect that would echo through the company and beyond. And in the end, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. There were still battles to be fought, but she had found her voice, and she would never let it be silenced again.